June 1944. A German Luftwaffe pilot, shot down over France, sits in an American POW camp being interrogated by U.S. intelligence officers. They're showing him photographs. Aerial photos of the Willow Run bomber plant in Michigan. The factory is 1 mile long, one continuous building. The officer explains that this single factory produces one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. The German pilot studies the photos carefully, then pushes them back across the table. "This is propaganda," he says. "These photos are fake. No factory can be this large. No nation can produce aircraft this quickly. You are trying to demoralize us with impossible lies." The American interrogator pulls out more photos. The River Rouge Ford plant, 16 million square feet of factory space, produces one military vehicle every 90 seconds. The German pilot shakes his head. "Impossible! You cannot fool me with these fabrications." The interrogator shows production statistics. In 1943, America produced 86,000 aircraft. Germany produced 25,000. The pilot's response is immediate. Lies. No industrial economy can produce at these rates. The photos are composites. The statistics are propaganda. I will not be deceived. This scene repeated thousands of times in POW camps across America and Britain. German prisoners, many of them educated officers, pilots, and technical specialists, were shown evidence of American industrial capacity. Photographs, statistics, even tours of actual factories. And they refused to believe it. They couldn't believe it, because accepting the evidence meant accepting that Germany had gone to war against an industrial power so overwhelmingly superior that defeat was inevitable from the start. That was psychologically impossible. So they declared the evidence fake. This is the story of how German POWs confronted American industrial might and decided it had to be propaganda. This is about the moment German confidence in their superior technology met the reality of American mass production. And this is about how psychological denial in the face of overwhelming evidence tells us something important about why Germany lost the war. Let's understand what German prisoners believed about industrial production before they were captured. Nazi propaganda had spent years telling Germans that American industry was weak, inefficient, corrupted by capitalism and Jewish influence. Americans, the propaganda claimed, were soft, decadent, more interested in making consumer goods than weapons. American workers were portrayed as lazy and unmotivated. American factories were supposedly chaotic compared to German precision engineering. German military leadership believed this propaganda to some extent. They'd studied American industrial capacity, but consistently underestimated it. German intelligence estimates of American aircraft production in 1942 were off by a factor of 5. They predicted America might produce 20,000 aircraft in 1943. The actual number was 86,000. Similar underestimates existed for tanks, ships, vehicles, and ammunition. German planners simply couldn't conceive of production at American scales. When German soldiers were captured and sent to POW camps, they entered a system designed partly for detention and partly for intelligence gathering. American and British intelligence wanted to understand German military capabilities, morale, and strategic thinking. Part of the interrogation process involved showing prisoners evidence of Allied industrial and military strength. The goal was to extract information, but also to demoralize the enemy by demonstrating that Germany couldn't win. The photographs American interrogators used were real. The Willow Run plant, built by Ford to produce B-24 bombers, was genuinely 1 mile long under one roof. At peak production in 1944, it produced 650 B-24s per month, one every 63 minutes. The River Rouge plant produced jeeps, trucks, and tanks at rates that seemed impossible by European standards. These weren't propaganda exaggerations. If anything, the photos understated American capacity because they showed only individual factories, not the dozens of other factories producing similar equipment. German prisoners' reactions to these photos are documented in interrogation reports, POW camp records, and post-war interviews with former prisoners. The consistent pattern was disbelief. Not polite skepticism, aggressive denial. Prisoners would argue that the photos had to be faked, that the statistics were impossible, that America was engaged in massive psychological warfare. Even when shown multiple sources of evidence, many prisoners maintained that it was all elaborate deception. Why couldn't they believe? Several psychological factors were at work. First, cognitive dissonance. If American industry was this powerful, then Germany's decision to go to war with America was suicidal. Prisoners couldn't accept this because it meant their sacrifices, their friends' deaths, their nation's suffering were all for a cause that was hopeless from the beginning. Better to believe the photos were fake than accept that the war was unwinnable. Second, propaganda effectiveness. German prisoners had been told for years that American industry was inferior. This belief was reinforced by early war successes. Germany conquered Poland in weeks, France in 6 weeks, pushed deep into Russia. German military technology, the Panthers, Tigers, Me-262 jets, V-2 rockets, was genuinely advanced. It was easy to believe that German technical superiority would trump American industrial capacity. Being shown evidence that contradicted this created psychological resistance. Third, scale incomprehension. Most German prisoners came from a European context where factories employed hundreds of workers and produced dozens of units per month. A factory a mile long, employing 40,000 workers, producing hundreds of bombers monthly, was outside their frame of reference. It seemed physically impossible. Like showing a medieval farmer a photograph of a modern combine harvester and expecting him to believe it's real. The scale was so different that it seemed fake. The interrogators developed techniques to overcome this denial. Some camps arranged tours of nearby factories. German prisoners would be loaded onto buses and taken to visit aircraft plants, tank factories, or shipyards. They'd see the production lines with their own eyes, watch bombers being assembled, count the aircraft in various stages of completion. This should have been conclusive evidence. But many prisoners found ways to maintain their denial even after seeing factories firsthand. They'd argue the factories were temporary facilities built just to impress prisoners and would be dismantled after the tour. or that the factories were producing at unsustainable rates that would soon collapse, or that the quality of American equipment was so poor that quantity didn't matter. Anything to avoid accepting the uncomfortable truth. Some prisoners did accept the evidence. These tended to be the more educated officers, engineers, or pilots with technical training who could evaluate production methods objectively. A German engineer who toured Willow Run might recognize that the assembly line techniques were genuine and efficient. He couldn't explain away what he'd seen. These prisoners often became deeply demoralized. If America could produce at these rates, Germany had already lost. The war was just going through the motions until Germany's inevitable collapse. The psychological impact of accepting American industrial superiority was devastating. German prisoners who believed the evidence often fell into depression. They'd write letters home, trying to warn families that the war was lost, though these letters were censored. They'd stop participating in camp resistance activities. Why try to escape or resist when Germany was doomed? Some prisoners became cooperative with interrogators, providing information about German military dispositions because they believed helping to end the war sooner would save German lives. But the majority maintained their denial through various rationalizations. One common argument was that American equipment was inferior in quality. Yes, America produces many tanks, but German Panthers are superior. One Panther can destroy 5 Shermans. Therefore, German quality beats American quantity. This argument had some truth. German tanks were generally superior in one-on-one combat, but the math didn't work. If America produces 10 Shermans for every Panther, even trading 5 Shermans per Panther means America wins. Prisoners who made this argument were avoiding the logical conclusion. Another rationalization was that American production was unsustainable. Yes, these factories exist and are producing at high rates, but they're consuming resources faster than can be replaced. Soon they'll run out of steel, aluminum, rubber. Production will crash, and Germany's steady, sustainable production will win in the long run. This argument ignored that America had vast natural resources, controlled global shipping lanes, and wasn't being bombed. German production was actually the unsustainable one. The most interesting rationalization was conspiracy thinking. Some prisoners argued that the photographs and statistics were part of a Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy to demoralize German fighting spirit, that American Jews controlled industry and were producing propaganda to trick Germans into surrendering. This let prisoners dismiss evidence without engaging with it. If everything is a conspiracy, no evidence counts. Intelligence officers documented these reactions because they were strategically important. Understanding how German military personnel thought about American capacity helped predict German strategy and morale. If German leadership was similarly in denial about American production, they'd make poor strategic decisions. And they did. Germany's decision to declare war on America after Pearl Harbor, Hitler's belief that he could win a two-front war, the continued resistance in 1944–45 when defeat was obvious, all suggested German leadership was disconnected from industrial reality. Some of the most revealing documentation comes from prisoner conversations that were secretly recorded. Allied intelligence bugged POW camp barracks and recorded German prisoners talking among themselves. These recordings show the cognitive dissonance clearly. Prisoners would acknowledge that the factories seemed real, that production rates seemed accurate, but then immediately pivot to explaining why it didn't matter, or must be temporary, or was somehow faked. One recorded conversation from 1944 has a Luftwaffe pilot telling other prisoners about his factory tour. He describes seeing the assembly line at Willow Run, watching B-24s being built, counting aircraft. Then he says, "But I believe this is a special facility they only show to prisoners. The rest of America cannot be like this. It's impossible." Another prisoner agrees. "Yes, they have built one impressive factory to fool us, but Germany has hundreds of factories. We are still ahead." This, despite having been shown statistics proving Germany produced 1/5 the aircraft America did. The denial extended to evidence beyond factories. German U-boat prisoners were shown photographs of American shipyards producing Liberty ships, cargo vessels that carried war material to Europe. At peak production, American shipyards launched 3 Liberty ships per day. German prisoners argued this was impossible. Ships take months to build. 3 ships per day from all American shipyards combined might be believable. 3 per day from multiple shipyards meant dozens of ships per day total. This seemed absurd. Therefore, the photos were propaganda. When interrogators explained that Liberty ships used prefabrication and welding instead of traditional riveting, cutting construction time from 365 days to 45 days, prisoners dismissed this as technically impossible. Welded ships would break apart in storms. Prefabrication couldn't maintain quality standards. The ships must be death traps. The fact that Liberty ships successfully crossed the Atlantic thousands of times, carrying millions of tons of cargo, was ignored or explained away. The psychological phenomenon documented in these POW camps has broader implications. It shows how propaganda and belief systems can make people immune to evidence. The German prisoners weren't stupid. Many were educated, technically trained, intelligent observers. But they'd been so thoroughly conditioned to believe in German superiority and American weakness that contradictory evidence was rejected automatically. They'd rather believe in elaborate conspiracies than accept that their foundational beliefs were wrong. This has modern parallels. People today routinely reject evidence that contradicts their beliefs, regardless of how strong the evidence is. We see this in politics, science, economics. Show someone evidence that contradicts their worldview, and they'll find ways to dismiss it. The German POWs refusing to believe factory photographs weren't unusual. They were displaying normal human psychology. We all do this to some extent. The tragedy is that German military leadership displayed similar denial. When intelligence reports came back from America showing massive production capacity, Hitler and his inner circle dismissed them as exaggerated. When German losses mounted and couldn't be replaced while American forces grew stronger, Nazi leadership blamed sabotage, betrayal, lack of will. Anything except the simple truth that Germany had started a war it couldn't win against an industrial power 10 times larger. By late 1944, Even the most dedicated German prisoners were running out of rationalizations. The evidence was overwhelming. American aircraft filled the skies. American tanks poured into Europe. American supplies sustained Allied armies advancing from both east and west. Germany was collapsing. Some prisoners finally accepted reality. Others maintained denial until Germany's surrender in May 1945, and even after. Post-war interviews with former German POWs who'd been shown the factory photographs reveal interesting patterns. Some admitted they'd been in denial and felt foolish about it later. They recognized that the evidence had been real and they'd rejected it for psychological reasons. Others maintained even decades later that the photographs and statistics had been exaggerated, that American production wasn't as impressive as claimed, that Germany lost for other reasons. Belief systems are hard to change, even with overwhelming evidence and decades of reflection. The story of German POWs refusing to believe American factory photos is really about human nature. We construct worldviews that make sense of our experience. When evidence contradicts those worldviews, we don't immediately update our beliefs. We question the evidence. We look for reasons to dismiss it. We maintain our beliefs because changing them means admitting we were wrong, sometimes profoundly wrong, about important things. The German prisoners who couldn't believe the photographs weren't evil or stupid. They were human. They'd been told their whole lives that Germany was superior, that German technology and will would triumph, that enemies were weak and degenerate. Being shown evidence that all of this was false required accepting that they'd sacrificed for a lie, that their friends had died for nothing, that their nation had started an unwinnable war. That's psychologically devastating. Better to believe the photos were fake. But the photos were real. The factories were real. American industrial capacity was exactly as overwhelming as the statistics showed. Germany had gone to war against an economy that could outproduce it 5-to-1 in aircraft, 3-to-1 in tanks, and 10-to-1 in overall industrial capacity. The war was lost before it began. The German POWs refusing to believe the factory photographs weren't rejecting propaganda. They were rejecting reality. And reality didn't care whether they believed it or not. June 1944. A German pilot sits in a POW camp looking at photographs of American factories and declares them fake. Outside, American factories are producing 1 bomber every hour, 1 tank every 15 minutes, 1 ship every 8 hours. The pilot's disbelief doesn't slow production by a single minute. His denial doesn't change the fact that Germany is being buried under an avalanche of American industrial output. But believing the photos are fake lets him maintain his worldview for a little longer. Sometimes we'd rather believe comfortable lies than face uncomfortable truths, even when the truth is right there in the photograph, staring us in the face.